Welcome in. It's Big Ten Today presented by Gatorade. We are missing Dave Revson, but it's still the Friday walkthrough. Jerry DiNardo and Nicole Auerbach.
A two-person walkthrough.
Yes.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. We don't need Dave.
Who needs Dave?
Who needs Dave? All right, let's start with our big story. And of course, it takes us to Ann Arbor. Michigan head coach Jim Harbaugh will remain suspended through the end of the regular season after he, the university, and the Big Ten resolved their pending litigation on Thursday. Harbaugh will not be on the sidelines for Michigan's game against Maryland this weekend, and he will also miss the big game against Ohio State. Sharon Moore will again be Michigan's acting head coach. Here is the statement that Michigan put out on Thursday. The university, Coach Harbaugh, and the Big Ten resolved their pending litigation. The conference agreed to close its investigation, and the university and Coach Harbaugh agreed to accept the 3-game suspension. Coach Harbaugh, with the university's support, decided to accept this sanction to return the focus to our student athletes and their performance on the field. The conference has confirmed that it is not aware of any information suggesting Coach Harbaugh's involvement in the allegations. The university continues to cooperate fully with the NCAA's investigation. Now, here's what the Big Ten said a little bit later. They said the Big Ten's conference commitment to the student athletes, sportsmanship, and the commissioner's duty to protect the integrity of competition will never waver. Today's decision by the University of Michigan to withdraw its legal challenge against the conference's November 10th notice of disciplinary action is indicative of the high standards and values that the conference and the university seek to uphold. The University of Michigan is a valued member of the Big Ten Conference, and the conference will continue to work cooperatively with the university and the NCAA during this process. Jerry, there was also a little bit of news earlier on Friday morning. Michigan announced that linebackers coach Chris Partridge has been fired. This is the first full-time position coach to have been fired or let go during this investigation. Rick Minter, Jesse Minter's father, will take over as linebackers coach. So there has been a lot going on since last week when Sharon Moore took over right on the eve of the game. What do you make of Jim Harbaugh fully accepting his suspension now?
Well, let's start with the student athletes. They are the most important people. Let's start with the Michigan players. This gives them some clarity, right? Sharon Moore is going to be there for them Saturday. Coach Harbaugh will be with them all week up until literally they leave the hotel, because Coach Harbaugh traveled with the team today by way of example. So I think that's good for the student athletes. I also think it's good for the Michigan players because there's a lot of people that will not give whatever success Michigan has, will not give the players credit for it. They will not validate it because of this controversy. So maybe people that feel that way will soften their blow. There's no reason to punish the players. The players on the other teams that Michigan has played, I think it gives them hope that if you break the rules, the conference has your back. And I think lastly, Commissioner Petiti, this validates that this was a fair punishment. Otherwise, Michigan, after rethinking it, would not have accepted it. So I think it's great for the conference office and great for the commissioner. The interesting thing is the new stark reality for Sharon Moore.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, another thing that I think is interesting, as you mentioned, Tony Petiti's punishment. We talked about this last week, but he's figuring out a way to punish Michigan and the representative of Michigan, the head coach, without hurting those players. So the fact that Jim Harbaugh is able to go with the team, that he has been at practice and part of the game planning, you are trying to limit the impact on the student athletes themselves. But clearly, this is a great example of stuff coming in real time.
Right.
We are watching Michigan learning more information about what the NCAA has against them, react to that, like the firing that we saw earlier today. You mentioned Sharon Moore. He is going to be Michigan's acting head coach now against Maryland and against Ohio State. So these are big games for Michigan. So what changes with him knowing that he is the game day coach on Saturdays?
You know, I think he's going to learn that every game for a head coach is different. Think of what Sharon Moore has gone through with his 2 interim head coaching jobs. Bowling Green. What did he have to do against Bowling Green? He really just had to coach the offense. There wasn't a chance that he was going to have to make a game management decision that was going to sway the game one way or the other. Go for 2, short yardage, goal line. That just wasn't going to happen in Bowling Green. Then when they go to State College, This is an emotional game, right? The players have emotion. This is a big game. There was a possibility that he may have had to make one of those decisions, go for two, block a punt and so on, but it never came. This is the trickiest one, Nicole, in my opinion, because everybody in the Maryland program thinks they're going to show up and they're going to beat Maryland. The one person that has to be convinced that they could lose that game if their team is not focused is the head coach. Nobody else wants to think about we could lose a game to an explosive Maryland offense. But the head coach better know that, and the head coach has to realize that, and he's got to watch for focus. You know, are they acting the same way at the pregame meal they were against Michigan, or they were against Bowling Green and all that? So he's going to learn every game is different. This one will be his biggest challenge until next week.
Well, and we saw last week, because there was so much uncertainty of whether or not Jim Harbaugh could kind of come off the bus, right, and make it right there before the game. It was very emotional. Sharon was emotional in the post game as well. This is more organized. Michigan knows that this is what it's going to look like and how they're going to approach this game. And it is the game before the game. And so you can work through some of those things with someone else on charge on Saturdays. So let's talk about this game against Maryland. It is an interesting one. Maryland gets off the mat last week, but what are the keys to this game for the Wolverines?
Well, again, I think the key is focus. I think they have to understand that they can't be looking ahead to Ohio State, which is always a problem for any team that's in a big rival game. The week before is a little touchy. And again, Sharon's going to have to address this, and he's going to have to make sure. And there'll be signs if your team's not focused, and Sharon has to get a feel for that. I think the other side, on the Maryland side, for them to have success, the best player has to play his best game, and that's Leah, right? So they've got to protect him. I think they're going to have to max protect. This Michigan defense is maybe one of the best, if not the best defense in the country.
I was going to say, I mean, this is going to be a front that's going to present a lot of challenges for Maryland. And obviously he's gone against some of these great defenses that we have in the East. But what do you see in that challenge? What's the key for Talia?
Just stay in the pocket. Don't try to make a play if everybody's covered. To think that, for Leah to think that he's going to drop back and someone's going to be open every pass play is not right. Throw an incompletion if you have to. If you break the pocket, don't throw it late across the middle because you can't see and people can be coming from behind you. Just play smart at quarterback. But the offensive line has to give them protection, and they may think about rethinking their protections. Instead of a five-man protection with the five offensive line, they may use a tight end or an H-back to go to a six-man protection. They might even use a tight end, an H-back, and a running back and go to a seven-man protection to give Leah a little bit more time.
Yeah, that's going to be the key, especially when we look on the other side and we come out of this performance from Michigan where they didn't try to throw a pass in the second half of the game. We finally saw some explosive run plays out of this Michigan's offense. Do you anticipate a similar offensive look with Sharon Moore back on the sidelines as the acting head coach?
I think it's going to look more like pre-Penn State. I mean,
okay, so more passing.
More passing. I mean, more passing means that you threw a completion in the second half. So it's a low bar.
Yeah.
But they did what they had to do to beat Penn State. And some of the formations that they made the Penn State defense, which is really good, adjust to. I mean, that was a well thought out game plan. It's hard to think in 2023 you could win that type of game without throwing a pass. But they did it. They got J.J. Moore involved in the run game, which they won't do tomorrow. They'll do it a week from tomorrow because it helps stabilize the defense. So, again, well done with the game plan. Whether Coach Harbaugh was a big part of it, Sharon certainly is a big part of it as the coordinator, but not to throw past the second half. They threw one, it was a penalty.
Yeah, it doesn't count. It doesn't count. So we can still say all these things. I mean, it was such an interesting departure from, like you said, about the way that they've run this offense prior. And I think it was a lot more about what we saw last year, right, where they would just kind of really establish the run. And they had those explosive plays from both Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. So it was showing that they can still win a game that way. But also we've seen JJ improve so much as a passer that if the game is decided on his shoulder, I liked it. I like that we finally saw this dimension of this team, which we saw a lot last year.
The real tricky part about JJ being part of the offense, meaning running the option, he got hurt in the Penn State game. Remember, he turned his ankle. That was actually a movement pass, if I remember right. It wasn't really an option. But the problem when you don't run JJ every week, which you certainly should not when you outman the opponent, right? Why would you put your quarterback at risk? But when you need your quarterback in the option, there's two problems with it. Putting him at risk, which is an obvious problem, him getting hurt, but the live speed of the mesh, it's a pretty technical play. Urban calls it a expensive play, right? It takes a lot of time to work, and if you're not running it against the lesser opponents, when you come to the best opponents, sometimes the mesh and sometimes the technique of that play can be difficult.
Yeah, no, these are great points and great things to watch. Again, there's a lot going on from an actual technical standpoint, but then also just the emotions of going through what they've been going through without Jim Harbaugh and the week before the game. And we are going to make sure that we get you covered on both sides, by the way, both teams that are preparing for that matchup next week. But how about this week? Tomorrow is a huge day of football at the Big Ten Network. At noon Eastern, Michigan State takes on Indiana, and Purdue battles Northwestern. And then at 4, Marvin Harrison Jr. leads a second-ranked Ohio State against Minnesota. Coverage begins with the Big Ten tailgate tomorrow, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. For more on that huge matchup in Columbus, let's send it over to Mike Hall and Tyvis Powell.
Yeah, Nicole, we're getting ready for the 55th edition of Minnesota and Ohio State. Tyvis Powell alongside me here in Columbus. Let's address the wet elephant in the room. It's pouring now, but it won't be come game time tomorrow.
It'll be a little cold, but you know what? It's going to be good weather. I think that's not going to affect the way these offenses want to go out there and attack each other.
So Ohio State is sitting here with Big Ten title hopes on the line, a chance at the playoff as well. What's the most important thing they have to do against the Gophers?
Well, tomorrow they have to do a better job at stopping the run. Even against Michigan State, I seen Nate Carter get a couple of nice runs off. Wisconsin got some runs off. I think they got to be very stout on that defensive line, and them linebackers got to be able to stop that run because Minnesota is a really good running team.
You know, I could argue the biggest challenge for Ohio State is not what will be happening on the field, but what's happening between the ears. Because this is a 500 Minnesota team, and next week is one of the greatest rivalries in all of American sports.
Yeah, but you can't focus on that. Listen, tomorrow is senior night for these guys. The last time they'll be able to play in this stadium, so the emotions will be flying. Please do not lose that game. You want to go out on top in your last chance playing in the shoe.
Now, you had some experience right this. I mean, you played in a few of those games before the games. Tell me about the one that sticks out.
Well, Michigan State in 2015 sticks out the most, Mike. You know, it was a similar situation. We were undefeated. Michigan State came in, a really good football team, night game, senior night as well, and we lost. We really kind of overlooked them because we were ready for that rivalry game, and we lost our last game here and ultimately lost our chances of getting to the CFP. So take it from me. You don't want to go through that again.
Right, that was the year after you guys won the national title.
Yeah, we didn't get a chance to defend our title.
Ohio State still has a shot at a national title this year, but first things first, they have the Gophers on Saturday. We're going to come back in just a little bit, Nicole. Brock Vereen will be with me, and we'll talk about the Minnesota side of things.
Welcome back to Big Ten Today. Here's a look at the Week 12 slate in the Big Ten. We have touched on the Wolverines and the Terrapins and the Gophers and the Buckeyes. We have a dual window on the Big Ten Network with Michigan State taking on Indiana and Purdue traveling to Northwestern to face newly minted head coach David Braun. Two Big West battles with Illinois going to Iowa City and Nebraska taking on Wisconsin. Let's start with that noon game between Rutgers and Penn State in Happy Valley. This game is coming on the heels of Penn State making a change at offensive coordinator. Mike Yurcich was relieved of his duties after that loss to Michigan. So, Jerry, what do you expect to see? What changes when you make a change like this?
Right. So, Jay Juwan, Saida, and Tyler Howell take over for Yurcich. And so this late in the season, this is a little different than what Tom Allen did at Indiana when he made a change about mid-season. But it's unrealistic to think that the offense is going to change. I think most people think when you change coordinators like this that they may put plays in and change up what they've been doing. That's not true. The best play calls are when you call a play. I used to compete against Steve Spurrier when he was calling plays, and it was a very simple offense. His genius was when he threw a certain pass against a certain coverage. So I think when you change coordinators this late in the season, that's really what happens. So the play selection will be much different. It's interesting. People always say coaches don't ever listen to the media. Coaches don't listen to the fans. This is an example that's probably going to fly in the face of that logic because everything that Mike Yurcich did that either the media or the fans didn't like, We will see that tomorrow. Rutgers will see that tomorrow. They talk about throwing the ball more vertically than they have. I think you'll absolutely see that because coaches do listen to the media. They do listen to fans. And sometimes, like all of us, they're right. And so to me, that's going to be the biggest storyline. So I say all that to say this, Nicole. Rutgers has to just play their base defense, defend the base plays that they've been running all year, and then see where the wrinkles are. And Greg Schiano is one of the best at this, down to get on the sidelines and adjust to the wrinkles.
Well, it's such an interesting timing, as you mentioned, to be doing it this late in the season. But also, again, we talk about this with Penn State a lot, right? They can win every game on their schedule. But if you don't beat Ohio State and you don't beat Michigan, especially this year with the amount of talent on that team, it does force change. It does put pressure on making change. So you're right, there's so much talent there. How are they going to use it in slightly different ways with different play calling?
Yeah, a lot of teams can't beat Michigan and Ohio State as well, but this is the life that Penn State lives in. And they have to embrace those rivalries. I mean, one of their themes or one of their trademarks is unrivaled. Well, it appears that not all games are the same, especially from the fans' perspective. And so every chance they get to play the Michigans and the Ohio States, it's a big game. That's not going away.
It is, and it's going to get more and more challenging next year with the new schools coming in to the Big Ten. Let's talk about the Rutgers offense. We didn't see much of it against Iowa, and listen, Iowa does that to people. But what do you expect to respond? Can the run game come back? Can it keep Rutgers in this game against this Penn State front?
Well, by virtue of their option offense, they'll burn the clock. That'll try to keep them in the game. I mean, the issue is they're an option team. Wimsatt is okay in the pass game. He's not great. I think one of the advantages you have, and if you're an option team and people are moving around a lot on the front, the conventional wisdom is just give the ball to the fullback, or not. There's no fullback any longer, but give the ball to the running back, and there'll be a crease. So I think you'll see that from the Rutgers offense. I think you'll see a lot of really triple option type of plays to try to slow down the Penn State defense. Penn State defense is really good.
They get a lot of negative plays. They're going to be in that backfield. They're going to be putting a lot of pressure on Gavin Wimsatt. It feels like, if we say this every week with Rutgers, right, if the defense and maybe if they can, kind of chew some clock, that they can stay in this game, keep it close late, and give themselves a chance.
Right. I mean, they've already established that this year is a significant year of progress, right? They were bowl eligible last week going into Iowa, and I think a lot of us thought that this was a matchup opponent against Iowa. And Iowa's a traditional Big Ten team. They're going to probably go to Indianapolis. So to say that Greg Schiano was bowl eligible going into that game last week, this is a little different, though. I mean, Penn State's a really good team. They have the most talent. The issue with Penn State is if the loss to Michigan is a distraction, the Mike Yurcich firing is a distraction, and they're going to have to get past that distraction.
Absolutely. This is a big game. My neck of the woods in New Jersey, big for recruiting in this area, so we'll be watching that one. But let's get back to Minnesota, Ohio State. Let's start with a flashback. It's been quite a while since Minnesota knocked off the Buckeyes. You'd have to go back to October of 2000 when the Gophers pulled off the upset in Columbus. Minnesota held the 6th-ranked Buckeyes to only 200 total yards. Travis Cole threw for over 240 yards and 2 touchdowns as Glenn Mason's team pulled off the 29-17 victory. To see if history will repeat itself tomorrow, we head back to Columbus with Mike and Brock Vereen.
Yeah, Nicole, long time since Glenn Mason strolled those sidelines and the Gophers got a win over Ohio State. Glad to have Brock Vereen with me now. Let's start kind of big picture with Minnesota entering this game. They're 5-5 on the season. Technically, they are still alive to win the Big Ten West.
Well, the West is always going to come down to the final week. If nothing else, we know that much. And yes, there have been some disappointing performances, maybe none of them more disappointing than last week at Purdue for the Gophers. But with games like this, you toss it all out. Because as crazy as it sounds, people will overlook some things if you can pull on a miracle, right? And let's call it what it is. It's going to take a tremendous effort. But they will be excited. They're not going to be hanging their heads. This is another opportunity. This is what P.J. Fleck excels at. It's getting his guys ready to go.
The last time Minnesota beat an AP top 5 ranked team on the road was last millennium. It was 1999.
Thank you.
So to your point, it's going to be hard. But lay it out for me. What has to happen for Minnesota to pull off the upset?
They have to be able to run the football, which It's easier said than done, especially when you consider the fact that we don't know who's going to be playing running back. They play their injuries close to the vest. Until that official report is released, we're not going to know who is back there. But this isn't a game where you can go ask Ethan Kaliak-Manis to throw the ball 40 times. We saw what happened last week. He's coming along, but it's just going to be asking too much. They have to control the clock. They have to play penalty-free. They have to generate turnovers defensively, which, to their credit, they have been able to do.
I was just going to say, I would assume turnovers would have to be important if you're going to try to pull off an upset. And again, the weather we don't expect slippery, so turnovers might have to just come naturally for
the old-fashioned way, as they say, which Tyler Newman and company are capable of doing.
So give me an offensive player that we should be keeping an eye on for Minnesota throughout the game.
Wide receiver Daniel Jackson, who has been tremendous. Ethan's coming along, like we said. The offense has been inconsistent, but he has been consistent. And quite honestly, in regards of performance, I'll call him the second best receiver on the field tomorrow. He's been great. Now, obviously, Ohio State will have something to say about that. Their cornerbacks have been playing phenomenal since they have gained some health. Of course, Lathan Ransom defensively won't be back there, but he's at safety. So there will be few windows of opportunity, but you have to get him the ball early. You have to get him the ball often. He has earned it, and he may have an NFL future if he can go out here and keep balling.
He's been really impressive.
Been phenomenal.
For sure. Defensively, Minnesota has been so different in their wins versus their losses. They average about 12 points a game allowed when they win, and it's like 39 a game when they lose. So give me a guy we should keep our eye on to tell us if their defense is playing well or not.
Jaw Joyner at defensive end. There was a bunch of hype of him coming out of spring ball, a 6'5" mountain, tremendous athleticism. Finished last year fairly strong, so going into spring ball and camp, they were excited. Somewhat of a slow start, but he's come along, especially in that Illinois game. Why Jaw Joyner? Because you can't go out there and expect to stop Marvin Harrison Jr. A lot of teams have tried. All of them basically have failed. So how do you stop it? You have to get to Kyle McCord. You have to ask your best pass rusher, hey, we're going to do our best to control that receiver, but we can't ask our corners to lock him down. What we can do is get in Kyle McCord's face, get him on the ground, get him uncomfortable, and make them a one-dimensional team that way by forcing them to run the football. But then again, you got Trayvon Henderson. That's not an easy task either. We're grasping at straws, but the fact is you get to Kyle McCord, you can stop Marvin Harrison Jr., kind of.
It's a tall task, especially for a road team in Minnesota, but you brought up some of the main concerns that they have for the offense of Ohio State. Nicole, when we come back, we're going to break down all those big names, not only Kyle McCord, as you mentioned, but how Trayvon Henderson has been coming on. And oh yeah, that Harrison character at the wide receiver spot.
Time to go around the Big Ten. Congratulations to Michigan State women's soccer for advancing to their first ever Sweet 16 after defeating Harvard 1-0 on Thursday. Justina Gaynor gave them the victory with a second-half penalty kick. The Spartans will now face number 1 seeded BYU on Saturday. 4 other Big Ten programs play today and will try to join Michigan State in the Sweet 16. Indiana men's soccer also advanced in the NCAA tournament with a 2-1 win over Lipscomb in the first round. The Hoosiers will face 10th seeded Wake Forest on Sunday with a trip to the Sweet 16 on the line as they look to avenge their loss in the national championship last season. Tonight, Wisconsin and Purdue square off in a top 20 showdown. Then undefeated top-ranked Nebraska hosts Michigan, a women's volleyball doubleheader powered by Unleaded 88 tonight, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Well, with 2 weeks to go in the regular season, Iowa leads the Big Ten West standings by 2
Who's
games.
in second place?
It looks like a tie. It looks like a tie.
Alphabetical?
The Hawkeyes have already clinched at least a share of the final Big Ten West divisional title, and they win it outright with either a win against Illinois or Nebraska, but every team in the West is technically still in the hunt except for Purdue. So there could still be some chaos down the stretch. Let's start by diving into this Illinois-Iowa game. I know you love the rankings. Like, how many? We're not going to get this that much anymore. We're going to lose the West, and we're going to lose, I think, the best division in college football.
Certainly the most balanced division in college
The most
football.
balanced, yes. You cannot top this.
Right.
Absolutely
Right.
not.
I'm with you.
But it
Totally.
keeps everybody alive, including Illinois. They're coming off a couple nice wins here. Iowa, though, 400 yards of total offense a week ago, kind of out of the blue. How did they do that?
Okay, so we all saw Kirk Ferentz's emotion after the game, right? And at the press conference, because his emotions were that they were doing things on offense that they've always wanted to do, and in his opinion, a lot of it was the injuries, and the players hung in there. But when you think about Iowa football, right, it starts with defense, right? So they held Rutgers to 127 yards. So you check that box. That's Phil Parker's defense. We expect that. What do you want to do in the run game? Well, they tailbacks had just over 200 yards, or right around 200 yards rushing. The official stat, there's a sack for the quarterback, so the official stat doesn't read that. But they had 200 yards rushing from the tailback position, and they had over 400 total yards. I think it was just over 401. Deacon Hill, to me, was the difference, right? When you look at Iowa football, you play defense, they do that every week. The run game this year, not so good, but we know that's what they want to do. They were banged up in the offensive line. You couldn't get the run game going. But Deacon Hill was 20 of 31 for 223 yards, one pick, one touchdown. And if you watch when he threw the ball and how he threw the ball, obviously third and long he threw the ball, right? But what really made it work is the downhill play action, where they would run downhill with the tailback, Deacon would pull the ball and then throw it, or they'd run the boot stuff. So it was all play action that made this work. Deacon Hill had some good times, he had some bad times in that game. But this is the first game where they played good. Well, always play good defense, run game, and pass game. That's why it looked like that.
Yeah, and he's taken more time to get comfortable in this offense that he got thrown into after Cade McNamara's injury. Speaking of injury, Cooper DeJean out for the season. It just incredibly bad injury luck these Hawkeyes have, and yet they're still in the driver's seat in the West. But Cooper DeJean was an electric player. He was a game-changing player. How much are they going to miss him?
They're going to miss him a ton, especially in the special teams. And when you look at Iowa special teams, obviously, that's where but he's also highly ranked as a cornerback going into the NFL. But I go back to the emotion of Kirk Ferentz. Nicole, he's emotional because this is what they always try to do. I mean, there's only a certain amount you can do with those 11 guys after the snap. And what they have chosen to do, yes, is more conservative than a lot of other teams. But we're talking about them going back to Indianapolis. Is it their third time or fourth time in Indianapolis, more than any other West team?
Right.
And so when his offense is being trashed and no one likes it, and then they play like this, and he believes a lot of it had to do with being healthier than they've been. Kirk Ferentz is an emotional guy, but he had reason to be emotional.
He did. And Illinois was emotional after their thrilling win. I don't know if anyone saw as many points as we saw coming from Illinois and Indiana. Luke Altmaier's back. Brett Bielema is going to go back to him as the starting quarterback this week. John Paddock's been an amazing story and got them these two come-from-behind wins. So what do they need to do against this Iowa defense, this team that may have found something offensively last week as well, to stay in this game?
Well, when Illinois is at its best, they really protect Altmaier in the pass game. In other words, they'll throw it deep, but a deep pass doesn't take long to throw. You don't get to snap any longer. You get to snap and you throw it in your back foot. It's gone in 1.5 seconds. Underneath, you can throw it quick. It's that intermediate that was getting Altmaier a little bit in trouble early in the season. So against a defense like Iowa, I think you have to build your offense. Run game is the run game. It's going to be tough to run. You're going to be outnumbered most of the time because Phil will bring a secondary player. Eyes are always in the backfield. They don't play a lot of man coverage. But what pass game can you generate against the Iowa defense? And that's based on Altmaier, not really based on the Iowa defense. What can he do?
Absolutely, and they're going to have to be really efficient in the red zone to give themselves a chance in this game. All right, let's flip over to Nebraska at Wisconsin, another impactful game in the West. Let's talk Nebraska. They are so close to bowl eligibility right now. They have 5 wins. That would be a major accomplishment for year number 1 under Matt Rule. Can they get it this week?
They can. This is a matchup opponent, right? They both could be bowl eligible after this week. I will say this. If Nebraska does win the game, this program and this fan base becoming bowl eligible after several years not being bowl eligible, which has happened to other teams, my point is this will be much different than what it would be like for another team that's been out of a bowl and in one, because that fan base is so wanting this. I look at these two teams. It's really interesting. both first-year coaches. Both could stay at both universities a long time if they have success. I believe they'll both have success. But they go about it different. Matt Rule has the defense that he wants to run, I believe, as long as he's at Nebraska, the 3-3-5. But the offense is so option, so conservative, that's going to evolve, in my opinion, as Matt recruits. Luke Fickell is in the opposite situation. I think that what they're doing on offense is what they want to do. They want to be physical run, but not out of the I formation. On defense is where they're going to have to change because of recruiting. I think what you've seen Coach Tressel do, defensive coordinator, is use the personnel he had, which was a lot of linebackers and not a lot of down linemen. So I think that you'll see Wisconsin recruit to a different style of defense, and you'll see Nebraska recruit to a different style of offense as we go forward. I believe both coaches will have success at their programs.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because of some of the inconsistencies that we've seen with Wisconsin's offense. A lot has to do with the injuries and the personnel that they have available with what they're trying to do. It's also a fascinating time for these two teams to meet with both at 5 wins. And, I think one, you could be disappointed in where Wisconsin is just with the expectations coming in and bringing in Luke Fickell, and then you're thrilled with 5 wins for Nebraska. So it's like, the exact same record. We were looking at the West standings, and it's totally different context.
Right, it is. And, Luke, I think we all thought that Wisconsin would be further along. And prior to the injuries, it looked like they were the favorite to win the West. And to think that Nebraska would have 2 games to get bowl eligible, I'm not a numbers guy. I don't know the last time that was in the position. But again, I think both coaches are great hires. Both coaches are going to have success. It's not going to be a West any longer, so it's not going to be. They may not play every year against each other, but I'm confident both guys got it right.
Yeah, I think the key for this, as we usually say with Nebraska, is to not turn the ball over. They win despite turnovers in a lot of cases, but that is always the key for them. It's actually incredible that they're at this point playing for bowl eligibility with the amount of turnovers they've had this season. Another statement from the University of Michigan. From the outset, our focus has been on seeking due process and allowing the NCAA to conduct a fair and deliberate investigation. Although the Big Ten has closed its investigation, we are continuing to cooperate with the NCAA as it moves forward with its ongoing investigation. Consistent with our commitment to integrity, we will continue to take the appropriate actions, including disciplinary measures based on information we obtain. Earlier today, Michigan Athletics relieved Chris Partridge of his duties as a member of the Michigan football staff. Due to employee privacy laws, we are unable to comment further. That is news from Friday. On Saturday, Big Ten Tailgate is all Big Ten all morning live from Ohio State, followed by a huge day of football. At noon Eastern, Michigan State takes on Indiana and Purdue battles Northwestern. Then at 4, number 2 Ohio State clashes with Minnesota, and in prime time, the Buckeyes and Gophers meet on the volleyball court. It's all Saturday, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Welcome back. Jerry DiNardo, Nicole Auerbach wrapping things up here on Big Ten Today. And we've got a couple games left to go, Purdue and Northwestern. But the big news happened off the field this week as David Braun, they pulled that interim tag, gave him the full-time position. The season's not over. They're not bowl eligible yet, but 5 wins is just so far beyond, I think, what we expected for this team this season.
Yeah, no doubt. We saw them in camp on the bus tour. If you'd have told me they were going to be 5-5, it would have been hard to believe just based on that one practice. But David Braun has done an incredible job bringing this team. But his future will depend more on recruiting, more on NIL than it is about what kind of coach he is. When you come up in coaching, you always have mentors, Nicole, about offense and defense, right? And people share information about offense and defenses with people that are in the profession that don't compete with one another. But you need to have a recruiting mentor, and because no one will share recruiting information with you. And so he's never been in a 1A program. He's never recruited, never walked into a 3-star or a 4-star or a 5-stars home. And so the learning curve, not on the field. He's proven the learning curve on the field he can handle. The learning curve is going to be recruiting. And it's different on every level. You have to, the sooner you find your niche in recruiting as a first-time head coach at any program, the better off you are. But again, congratulations to him. Congratulations to the players. He really deserves this. They need the NIL money with the teams, comparable with the teams that they're competing with. and they need to kill it in recruiting. And the head coach is the person that leads the recruiting wars. And if you don't have all assistants being top recruiters, it very rarely works.
Yeah, it's also interesting timing, as you mentioned, recruiting, because you have the transfer portal window opening in a couple of weeks, and then obviously the December signing period. So there's some certainty here. You also know for the current players who's going to be your head coach. And as you think about that, and we saw the social media posts from players on this current roster that wanted David Braun to get this job and wanted to play for him, that will obviously factor into decisions not to leave Northwestern, you have to think as well. The players really wanted this. We saw it, we heard it. They played really, really hard for him. How much do you think that ends up factoring in on a decision for an administration? Does it matter if the players want it?
I think it matters on the administrator. I think it depends on the administrator's background. My personal history is players don't like change, and a new coach comes in and it takes you about 2 weeks and you're their coach. You bring up the most important point, which I didn't have to live through, and that's the portal. That has an impact on guys in this sport, guys not wanting to leave. So it's a little different. But other than the portal, they don't like change, but a couple weeks, I mean, they're in a routine because there was a reason there was a change, and usually if you can give the players a good reason that this is going to be better, they're going to buy in.
Yeah, and again, congratulations to David Braun, a year ago in FCS football, and now the head coach of the Northwestern Wildcats. Let's talk a little bit about this game, Purdue at Northwestern. We talked about this earlier. Purdue is playing really hard despite the fact that they are not eligible to win, or they've been eliminated from contention in the West. But this is a very interesting matchup with the way both teams are playing. What do you think are the keys? Yeah,
neither team has won 2 games in a row, and this is an opportunity for them. I think Northwestern's been more consistent, especially on defense. The Purdue team has been kind of up and down. What separates the Purdue offense from the Northwestern offense is the Purdue offense really can be explosive. Northwestern's been good at times in offense, but really scheme-wise, their players aren't put in positions as many times to be explosive as the Purdue players on offense. So I give the edge to the Northwestern defense for being consistent. In offense, it might be a push, but they go about their business in different ways.
Yeah, and another team with the key with the turnovers is Purdue. If they don't turn the ball over, Northwestern doesn't really turn the ball over much, so that could be a factor here. And the last game of Saturday that we haven't talked about yet, Michigan State at Indiana. What do you make of the Hoosiers coming off a really tough loss?
Really tough loss. Matchup opponent. Rod Carey has done a really good job with that offense. So we talked about Penn State making the change earlier in the show. Rod Carey's running the same amount of option, or probably a little bit more than Walt Bell did, who was the coach that Tom fired. But his play selection has been different. That's different with every coordinator. What I like about the Indiana offense right now is Donovan McCulley has become a major part of it. And that's because of the scheme, right? If you're running the option, everyone has to have dive, quarterback, pitch, and you can really make the secondary vanilla. You can find the proper matchup for McCulley and take advantage of it, and Ron Carey's done a good job of that.
Yeah, no, they've looked very different since there was a coordinator change. That's actually why you do it mid-season, for the kinds of spark that we've seen. Now, Michigan State on the other side, they've been good at spurts. I think you kind of have to throw out last week because of the opponent that they were playing and the way the game was pretty much over right out of the gate. What can the Spartans do to stay in this one?
Just hang in there like they've been trying to do every week. It's really been tough on this team and the players, and you feel for them. But it is a matchup opponent, meaning that the talent's not much different on either side, and whoever really plays the game the best, more efficiently, doesn't turn it over, has less penalties, gives themselves a chance to win. So this is an equal game as I see it.
Yeah, I think so. And, this is another job that is open right now as we think about Michigan State. We talked about Northwestern filling their position by promoting from within. Michigan State probably get some clarity on that in the coming weeks about what kind of leader, what direction they go with.
Yeah, I mean, for a Big Ten school, I think it always starts with a successful coach that wants to move maybe into a bigger or better conference as he sees it. There's no telling where the search goes. I mean, if it's a good search, you should know where they're going, and I don't think we really know. It's all the same names being speculated for all the open jobs. That's pretty typical, but the fact that no one has proven who Michigan State is contacted, that's the sign of someone running a good search.
Yeah, and I think, again, I think you're going to be looking at folks with head coaching experience, ideally at the Power 5 level, because, again, this is a good job in one of the Power 2 conferences.